Let's talk about Breadtube. I actually never did a critical breakdown of this online phenomenon, mainly because I regarded it as an improvement on the social justice warriors that came before, a manifestation of left-wing discourse regaining some common sense, after a period of time in which it veered between senseless, censorious, and nonsense. Another reason was that I didn't care so much about the online left anymore, but tried to learn more about the academic roots of the woke state of mind, attack it at its source. In that, I actually gained a lot from the Breadtuber we shall focus on here, PhilosophyTube, whose thinking and videos are shaped by these academic ideas. Watching her videos gave me a newfound appreciation of Breadtube, and when I say newfound, I mean worse. In this video, we shall analyze and criticize a seminal feminist book, and at the same time see how PhilosophyTube reads it, and why her reading is indicative of the shortcomings and vices of Breadtube. It's time to break some bread. Breadtube is the reaction to the social justice warriors. The SJWs were dominant online between the years 2012 and 2015, and were a colossally stupid and extreme manifestation of woke ideas. They were low-hanging fruit for criticizing and making fun of, and the online backlash started in 2014 and took over for a few years. I was part of the backlash, and tried to steer it in a more thoughtful direction. One of my earliest projects was a series about Anita Sarkeesian, the most famous SJW and the most hated online figure at the time, in which I kept pointing out that she is not a problem, and is actually just a shallow manifestation of an ideology that is a lot more sinister than her. I actually didn't know back then where this ideology was coming from, but because of my background in philosophy, I could gauge the ideas behind Anita's rhetoric, and I realized that what is going on here runs a lot deeper than just misrepresenting video games. Unfortunately, as such things go, very few were interested in my more thoughtful criticism, and most preferred videos that went for blood. After a while, the SJWs were blown out of the water, but the anti-SJW movement was taken over by populist hacks, charlatans, and extreme right-wingers. And this opened the door for Breadtube. Breadtube made its presence felt around 2018, and eventually became the dominant political force online, to this day. In terms of what it brought to the art of video making, I would say there were two major contributions. One is the debate bros, who live-stream political debates they conduct on their channel, usually while simultaneously playing a video game. This is a huge improvement on the SJWs, who were notorious for not willing to debate their ideas, or to be exposed to any form of criticism. In fact, this was one of the main contributing factors for my awakening. Back in 2015, when Gamergate was happening, I followed some of the main players on Twitter to understand what it was all about. Being a leftist, I was inclined to think that the SJWs were the ones in the right, but then I found that many of them blocked me, simply because I followed some anti-SJW accounts. This taught me right away whose side I should be on. Many felt like me, and the anti-SJWs won the online war, eventually prompting the rise of better left-wing YouTubers, ones willing and able to debate ideas. The granddaddy of them all is Destiny, a YouTuber I have a lot of respect for. Destiny became famous for debating right-wingers, but is not considered a Breadtuber himself. However, he showed the way to those Breadtubers who came in his wake. The biggest debate bros are Hasanabi and Bosch. Bosch got the brains, Hassan got the looks, and they both make lots of money. More importantly, they exemplify the problem with the entire movement. They are pretty effective at criticizing right-wing ideas, but show no ability to criticize the left-wing ideas that they are defending. It's like they have only one eye open, the left eye, which looks critically at the right side of the debate, while their right eye remains shut. I don't expect much from Hassan, but I actually think Vosh is smarter than a lot of people give him credit for. Unfortunately, he is too smug to try to actually understand the criticisms of wokeness, or get to the bottom of those woke ideas that he is defending. And together, Porsche and Hassan set a bad example for all the rest. With the SJWs, we understood where they were coming from. They had an ideology, albeit self-contradictory to the point of clusterfuckery, and they stated it out loud. With the Breadtube debate bros, because they present their ideas through attacks on the anti-SJWs, it is a lot less clear where they stand. Sometimes they sound as if they believe in democracy, sometimes they are against it. Sometimes they are pro-liberal values, sometimes against. Sometimes they are for tolerance, often they are not, etc. Because of that, they can fool you into believing that they are a lot less extreme than they actually are. And the thing is, I think that they are also fooling themselves. I'm not sure that they fully understand the ideas that they are defending, and their implications. Breadtubers, in general, do understand that there is a problem with the SJWs, or woke scolds, as they call them, but fail to understand the root of the problem. They think these woke scolds simply have psychological issues, which affect their online behavior. Meanwhile, those of us who have kept studying the online left came to the realization that the problem is strictly ideological, and that the rot comes from the head, from the academy. Not from the students, as many of us believed back in the SJW days, but from the professors. And this is what people like Vorsh fail to see. Let's move on to the best that Breadtube has to offer, the creme de la creme of online progressive discourse nowadays, and see if the situation is any better there. The other new thing that Breadtube brought to YouTube is a unique form, combining theater, camp, comedy, personal confessions, philosophy, and political talk, to produce some excellent video art. It was perfected by two creators, ContraPoints and PhilosophyTube, who both have well over 1 million subscribers. And deservedly so, as they are great YouTubers, although personally I find them hard to watch, since they take hours to get to the goddamn point. But objectively, they deserve their success. I've made videos about each of them in the past, but there, I was arguing against a specific position they held. Here, I want to talk about the general problem that they have, which is the same one-eyed problem that the debate bros have. They are not critical enough towards the left-wing ideas that they are espousing. As a result, they help promote illiberal and harmful ideas, including ideas that are harmful towards transgender people, which they both are. My previous video on PhilosophyTube criticized what I saw as inability to see the antisemitism of the left, and since then, I realized that it is indicative of a deeper problem. Meanwhile, my target of criticism went through an even bigger change. Back then, PhilosophyTube's real-life name was Oliver. Since then, she came out as a trans woman called Abigail, but that didn't do anything to improve her critical thinking. In this video, we shall be criticizing one of Abigail's recent offerings. PhilosophyTube is a channel focused on philosophy, like mine. But there is a difference between us. I focus on the great philosophers, those who create a new worldview that can take you out of your world. Abigail prefers to talk about the works of contemporary philosophers, those who work within established philosophical worldviews and present political arguments. I find such writings to have a diminishing effect on the spirit, but I am thankful to have a YouTuber who reads and summarizes them for me. How good is she in analyzing the text? She's fine. Like I said, I don't think she's critical enough, and I will soon demonstrate what I mean. But I don't cringe when I watch her interpreting a philosophical text, the way I cringe, for instance, when watching a School of Life video. If you are looking for a short summary and some basic discussion of philosophical texts, presented in an engaging way, PhilosophyTube is a good watch. Recently, she made a video I found very helpful. It is titled The Hidden Rules of Modern Society. It starts with her recounting a recent case in which citizens' rights in Detroit were trampled on by the government, which, in true radical leftist fashion, she then uses to tar the entire American system with. Then she asks,
how did this happen? What does it tell us about the real nature of that system? What has happened to the social contract? To answer that, we're going to learn what the social contract is, what its weaknesses are, and then what's happening to it today.
which, of course, provides her with an excuse for a change in attire.
Hey there, I'm Trixie Mephistopheles from the law firm Beelzebub, and Jones. I'll be preparing your briefs. Here's the deal. The social contract is an idea that's turned up in various philosophers' works over the last 350 years. If I explain all of them in detail, we'll be here till Armageddon. As a demon, I have forever, but as a lawyer, I charge by the hour. So let me give you the broad strokes. We live, it has been said, in a society. How did that happen? Well, philosophers who subscribe to this social contract idea like to imagine a time before society existed, when there were no rules or laws yet. They call it the state of nature. What exactly the state of nature was like depends on who you read. Bottom line, the state of nature was whatever came naturally to human beings, which could have been a lot of things. Society is everything that got built on top. In the state of nature, people had some freedoms that they don't have now. For instance, if somebody steals your stuff in the state of nature, you can go and clobber them. You can't do that now. There's a justice system that's supposed to handle it, unless you live in Detroit. But because the state of nature has some downsides, like anybody can clobber you and it's hard to get stuff done, people came together and agreed to live in a society. So that's the basic idea in a nutshell. You've got your three main ingredients. The state of nature, where everyone's naturally free, the people who came together, and the agreement they made to limit their freedom in exchange for civilization.
Pretty good summary, including the parts that I cut out, in which she goes into more detail about the differences between the philosophers. Except she makes it seem like we are making a deal with the devil, and later we shall inquire about the meaning of that. Then she says this.
Now you're very clever, so you've probably already realized that that's a load of bollocks. That never happened. That's completely made up. And yes, people have been saying that since the beginning. However, that's not the point. It's not meant to be an accurate historical story. Social contract theory is meant to give us a nice test to evaluate the societies we do live in. We can look at a government, or an institution, or even a specific piece of legislation, and ask ourselves, is this the sort of thing that free, equal people would agree to live under? And if the answer to that is no, then we have good reason to reject it.
Indeed, this is what we talk about today when we discuss the social contract. It is not a historical truth, but the ideal at the basis of the liberal democratic society. It represents what we believe to be the most rational rules that human society should be run by, and we all, supposedly, become part of a contract in which we pledge to follow and defend these rules.
With that in mind, you can maybe see how, from one perspective, this was kind of a radical idea at the time. Human beings are born free and equal, and governments are only legitimate if you agree to them? That kind of talk could spark a revolution. Because according to Rousseau again, human beings can come together and agree and make progress. Government can set people free to do that if it's arranged in the right way. But some of Rousseau's contemporaries said, no, you've forgotten about sin. Humans are inherently wicked. They have a tendency towards evil. The job of government is to keep a lid on that. It should be run by people who know what purity and faith is, not set everyone free to indulge their sinful desires. And this battle continues to this day. There are still people who say, no, the right to govern does not come from the people, at least not ultimately. It comes from God. And so on behalf of God, we will take control of society, whether people agree or not. Whether it's Christian nationalists in the USA trying to overturn elections, or the Taliban and ISIS, this philosophical issue is not ancient history, it's happening right now.
We are beginning to sense Abigail's skewed vision. She highlights the right-wing objection to the idea that the right to govern comes from the people, but doesn't discuss the left-wing objection to it. Just like there are those who believe that
it should be run by people who know what purity and faith is.
There are also those who believe it should be run by people who know what social justice is, and that they should be the one to decide. And so, on behalf of social justice, they will take control of society, whether people agree or not. And that, too, is not ancient history, and is happening right now. Anyway, that's not the point of her video, so let's move on. She then provides the historical context in which the social contract theory arose in 17th century Britain, and says,
I tell the story of this context partly because it's interesting, and partly so you understand this philosophy did not come from nowhere. It was written in a particular time and a particular place, and it bears the marks of its origin, and that is going to be very important now, as we turn to some of the modern criticisms of social contract theory, starting with some radical feminism.
Go on.
This book is The Sexual Contract by Carol Pateman. It's a classic of second-wave feminism from 1988. Pateman studied social contract theory, and she has a few notes. In this section of the video, I'd like to take a detailed look at her work. You may not agree with everything she says. I certainly don't. But it will be provocative.
This is why I'm glad I watched this video. Ever since I started criticizing the woke left, I've been distinguishing between two forms of left. Liberal left, which I am part of, and what I termed creationist left. However, since I am not very familiar with contemporary academic literature, I didn't know exactly where this creationist leftism came from. I identified that it came out of feminism, and became a prominent way of thinking in the 1990s, but I didn't know much more. The creationist feminist texts that I did read were just atrocious, and insulted my intelligence. Here, finally, PhilosophyTube pointed me in the direction of a foundational text of creationist feminism, and creationist leftism, which is actually well written and thought-provoking, a real intellectual challenge. It is this text, and Abigail's reading of it, that will be the subject matter of this video. First, what do I mean by creationist leftism? Well, let's go back to the story of the social contract. The story is conjecture, yes, and before, we said that it is supposed to represent the ideal we should live by. There's more to it than that, though. For the thinkers of the 17th and 18th centuries, the Age of Enlightenment, it also represented the truth. The belief was that there is such a thing as a universal human nature, and because of that, there is a universally right way in which society should be constructed. The human mind, believed the philosophers of Enlightenment, can figure out this truth. So even if the story of the social contract is made up, it still represents what the philosophers believed that humans aspired to create, driven by their nature. This way of thinking dominated Western thought until the 1960s, the end of the modern age. By then, the pursuit of truth led us to doubt the belief that there is a universal human nature, or that the human mind is capable of figuring it out. For a leftist who wants to fight for a more free, equal and just society, this leaves two options. One is to say that while we can't create a perfect society, we can still aspire to do better. The way to do so is to keep adhering to the pursuit of truth, even though we can't reach the ultimate answer. What we can do is take a critical view towards the foundational ideas of our society and accept that they do not represent eternal truth, but evolved over time and could perhaps be improved. We should, therefore, perform genealogical research to see where they came from, expose the contingencies that they are based on, and thus free our mind to, possibly, come up with even better ideas. It's an incremental process of trial and error, trying to create the best society we can come up with. This is what liberal leftism is about. The other option is to give up on truth altogether and try to impose social justice. For a detailed genealogy of how this way of thinking infested the left, check out my previous video on Edward Said. The crux of it is the belief that the social contract, that set of values that Western society is based on, is actually the thing that prevents justice. It goes back to the practice of creating conjectural histories, but this time, the scholars creating these stories know that they are not telling a true story, but are just trying to reshape our collective mind in a way that, they believe, will bring justice. The story they all tell is of how the social contract was imposed on a state of nature that was equal and just, and replaced it with a structure that ensures the domination of one group of humans over another group. I call it creationist leftism because it does not believe that our ideas evolved over time. Rather, it believes that we live in a structure that was created once and dominates us ever since. There is no point in trying to work within the system to improve it, because it is oppressive and unjust by its nature, and any changes can only be cosmetic. The only way to achieve justice, believe the creationist leftists, is to bring down the oppressive structure, return to the equal state of nature, and then build a society based on it. In the language of creationist feminism, the oppressive structure is called patriarchy. With that in mind, let's turn to the book at hand, Carol Pateman's The Sexual Contract. First, let's let PhilosophyTube give us her summary.
Pateman's general thesis is that the story of the social contract, this supposedly radical idea about free people agreeing, is first of all a lie, but secondly, it hides the truth about how society really operates. In particular, as a feminist, she focuses on the ways in which what happens to women gets buried in the fine print. She says there's the official social contract, and then underneath there's a second sexual contract. The hidden rules which give men, the male sex, political control over women, the female sex. This idea of there being a second hidden contract has been really influential in the last 40 years of philosophy, especially in critical race theory, as we'll see later on. Remember the state of nature, the idea we talked about earlier? It's whatever comes naturally to human beings and society is everything built on top. Well, Pateman points out that a lot of the classic theorists made some pretty big and pretty political assumptions about the nature of women, like a lot of men did back then. Even though the state of nature is supposed to be before society, there's some cross-contamination going on here. According to the classic theorists, the social contract is something that men do. Men agree to make society. Women can't, that's just our nature, so we get to live in it. Specifically, we get to inhabit the roles that we are naturally suited for, according to men. We get to be their wives and their mothers. And that's a crucial detail. Pateman says this wasn't an accidental oversight. These philosophers didn't just forget that women existed. The reason we're not at the table is because we're what's on the menu. Part of society's job, she says, is to regulate men's access to our bodies for sex and reproduction. Every man is endowed by his creator with an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of pussy. The hidden rule, the sexual contract, is that women exist for men. And, she continues, if you assume that women exist for men, that we're naturally suited only for the domestic world, not the political one, then marriage is the legal embodiment of that assumption. Now you might want to say, hang on a minute. Husbands used to be able to do all that stuff, but marriage has been reformed. It's no longer legal to beat your wife, for instance, so is it still inherently patriarchal? Pateman says, yes. If you strip out all the patriarchal stuff, it wouldn't be marriage anymore. It'd just be a contract for sexual exclusivity or cohabitation or whatever. She says marriage would be obsolete without patriarchy. But again, you might want to come back and say, some women choose to get married. Some of us want to be actress/YouTuber girl bosses taking over the world, but some of us want to be trad wives and stay at home with the apron and the red lip, and the thigh highs and the cat ears. That's what makes some women happy. So is it still patriarchal if you do it voluntarily? Pateman says, doing it voluntarily, that's how they get you. You do it voluntarily, but even so, the institution of marriage still reflects the idea that this is the only kind of contract you're capable of making. The story about free, equal people agreeing hides the reality of the exploitation.
Yes, alright, all of this is in the book, and Abigail presents it well. But this summary is superficial and hides what is really going on in the book. I normally wouldn't have a problem with it. A YouTube video is not necessarily the place to go deep into philosophical texts, and surface-level presentations are legit. But when this superficiality amounts to providing cover for anti-liberal ideas, then I do have a problem. Let's drill deeper into Pateman's texts, and see what we uncover. Pateman starts the book, published, as we recall, in 1988, by noting that recently there has been re-emerging interest in the social contract theory. The interest she talks about came mainly due to the emergence of creationist feminist thought. She criticizes the feminist tendency to try to replace the social contract with a conjectural history of their own. The example she brings is a 1986 book by Gerda Lerner, titled, to my delight, The Creation of Patriarchy, in which Lerner positions the creation of patriarchy, the same patriarchy that is still ruling our lives today, thousands of years ago. Pateman believes that this approach is largely ineffective. A more useful approach, she argues, would be to take a critical look at the Age of Enlightenment, an age we know a lot about, and see how it created the patriarchal structures that still dominate our thought. How useful is it, she wonders, to go back to remote origins in Mesopotamia, when there are stories available of a much closer origin? Moreover, this more recent beginning of patriarchy is coincident with the emergence of the modern civil social order in which we still live. She further assures the reader that she does not intend to present yet another conjectural history, but construct her arguments out of known historical facts. Which made me happy to finally have a contemporary feminist text that deals with facts. It appears, at first, as if Pateman is not even a creationist feminist. But let's read on. Pateman highlights how the contract theorists, in some cases to this day, perceive themselves as anti-patriarchal. Because, up until the 17th century, the word patriarchy meant rule of the father. The perception was that children should obey their fathers, and, by extension, obey the monarch, who is the father of his subjects. The contract theorists refuted the right of monarchs to be sovereigns over their people, and claimed that it is the people who are the sovereign. Hence, they were anti-patriarchal. However, says Pateman, this is only half of the story. While they overthrew the father, and rejected his right to rule over them, the brothers still maintained his right to rule over his woman, and took it to themselves. The social contract is based on the values of liberty, equality, and fraternity should be understood literally. A band of brothers, where the sisters are kept out. Only the brothers have liberty and equality. The sisters remain subjugated. Pateman grounds her argument in the writings of all the famous social contract theorists of the 17th and 18th centuries, and convincingly shows that they did indeed leave women in a subjugated state. The important question, however, is whether the subordination of women is inherent to the social contract, or is it just a relic of the past which these thinkers were unable to free themselves from, but which the logic of the social contract eventually defeated? To put it differently, the American Declaration of Independence asserts that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, there is nothing self-evident about these truths, but if you choose to belong to the American society, you accept it as an axiom that the right to liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness are unalienable rights. You can argue about the meaning of words like liberty and equality, but you must accept them as rights. To deny any of these rights would be to reject the entire contract, the entire American system. But wait, what about the all men part? When the founding fathers wrote these words, they were actually thinking only about men, not women. Is this also an axiom that we must accept? Today, the Americans answer negatively. They, and the rest of the free world, understand the word men in the sense of humans, and say that these rights belong to all humans, including women. We perceive the focus on men as not inherent to the spirit of the American social contract, or to Enlightenment values, but actually contradictory to their spirit. It is a relic of the past, which humanity has left behind as part of its progress. Pateman disagrees. She argues that it is just a semantic trick that we've come to regard words like men or fraternity as gender-neutral words, and that this trick is designed to conceal the fact that the American society, as well as the British and Australian societies which he also studies, is still inherently patriarchal. The sexual contract, remember, is something that the Age of Enlightenment inherited. It is a contract that was created long before the 17th century, and which determined the nature of the relationship between the sexes, in which the man pledges to protect the woman, and the woman, in turn, pledges obedience to the man and access to her body. The contract theorists pretended to bring equality, but actually, the social contract that they designed was crafted in a way that cleverly preserved the sexual contract, the inequality between the sexes. How did they do that? How did they manage to create a society that was based on the values of liberty and equality, and still preserve the sexual contract? By distinguishing between the civil sphere and the private sphere. The civil sphere was defined as the thing that was created by human reason, and in it, only men were allowed to participate, and determine the laws and norms of society. The private sphere is family life, where a man lives with his wife and kids. In the private sphere, natural law still holds, and the natural law, they believed, is that man dominates the woman. However, they still had to pretend that the social contract includes everyone. Therefore, the marriage contract was devised, in which the woman agrees, of her own free will, to enter the social contract. Thus, we can pretend that we are all part of the free society, when half of us is actually subjugated. There is, Pateman claims, a self-contradiction at the heart of the social contract. On the one hand, it pretends to overcome the state of nature and create civilization instead. On the other hand, it still cleaves to the state of nature when it claims that men are naturally superior to women. She implies that this self-contradiction shows that the contract theorists were not entirely sincere in their enlightened talk. But I disagree that this is a contradiction. The fact that we moved away from the state of nature doesn't mean that human nature itself has changed, or that we are not still driven by it. The contract theorists try to devise a contract that would be compatible with what they believed human nature is. Just as today it is still obvious to us that children cannot live as free individuals and need to be under the care of their parents, to them the same thing was obvious about women. There is a hidden assumption implied in Pateman's discourse, which she never spells out, but will become very relevant as we criticize her work. and that assumption is that the social contract we live in today negates human nature. Before we continue, let's ask, is Carol Pateman a creationist feminist? Well, as we heard, she believes that we live in a patriarchy that was created around the 17th century. This, however, is not enough to qualify her as a creationist, according to my definition. To be a creationist feminist, you have to provide a conjectural history, which places the creation of the patriarchy in the distant past and implies that it subverted the harmonious state of nature. What we just described is not conjectural. She provides many quotes made by the contract theorists, and shows exactly how they constructed the two different spheres of the social contract. However, remember that her claim is that there is another contract, a sexual contract, hidden beneath the social contract, and for that contract, she does provide conjectural history, and places it in the distant past. Her claim is actually that this was when the patriarchy was formed, and the social contract merely provided cosmetic changes, but kept it essentially the same. And this is what creationist feminism is all about. Nevertheless, I will not brand her a creationist feminist if she can indeed prove that the sexual contract is inherent to the social contract. The social contract, as it was devised in the Age of Enlightenment, is not conjectural history, but a historical fact. If she can show that the inner logic of the social contract does indeed subjugate women, I would accept her feminist criticism as valid. Does she prove it? Well, throughout the book, she brings many examples for the bad ramifications it had for women in the past, and adds that there are still remnants of it even in her time. For instance, up until late 19th century, a woman could be jailed if she refused to have sex with her husband, and it was legal for husbands to beat disobedient wives, or keep them imprisoned in their home. And in the 1980s, it was still legal in some places for a husband to rape his wife. However, all of this only serves to refute her claim. She admits that things are getting better, which means that the social contract is actually a liberating force, which works against the old sexual contract, and gradually abolishes it. From our 2020s vision, we can see that all the contemporary problems she points out have also been solved since then. So what is she complaining about? Well, her argument actually does go deeper. So let's start again. I say start again because the book does not present any coherent argument developed in logical order. Pateman's argument exists on several levels, which are all jumbled together. We are now descending into what I perceive as the second level of her argument about the social contract, and it goes like this. The reason why only men take part in civil society is that only men are regarded as individuals, and only individuals can make and abide by contracts. Women, according to the early contract theorists, don't have the natural abilities to become individuals, and therefore they cannot be a side in the social contract. The argument made by the philosophers of enlightenment was that only men can act by the light of reason. It's not that women lack reason, but they are too controlled by their emotions to act according to it. Therefore, they believed, if we allow women to participate in civil society, the society created by reason, they will soon destroy it. Again, Pateman points out the apparent self-contradiction here. Women are seen as incapable of being a side to a contract, and yet they are compelled to sign the marriage contract, to agree to their subjugation. Furthermore, she claims that the whole concept of the individual is constructed upon this subjugation. The individual, according to the contract theorists, is someone who owns property, and that property includes his own body and the bodies of others. So, only because men own their wives can they be considered individuals, and part of the social contract. In other words, the social contract is built upon the sexual contract, and dependent on it. If it wasn't for the sexual contract, the social contract could not exist. Now we are getting somewhere. If the social contract is indeed dependent on the sexual contract, it means that the subjugation of women is inherent to it, and Pateman proves her point. But, again, the argument doesn't hold. It is simply not true that the individual is predicated on ownership of others. This was just one of the characteristics that the philosophers of enlightenment gave the individual. The claim about self-contradiction also doesn't hold. It could be claimed that one needs to be an individual only to be part of the social contract, which demands that you be governed by reason, but non-individuals can still enter other contracts, such as the marriage contract, which is more based on emotion. Also, at no point does Pateman consider that maybe the marriage contract is there to secure the rights of women, make sure that the system protects them as well. Pateman provides many historical examples to show how women were harmed by this patriarchal social contract, like the fact that they were not allowed to be paid workers, and even in her time they still hold only low-paying jobs, or the fact that until late 19th century, men could sell their wives to other men, and even in her time, because women don't earn much, they are still economically dependent on men. But this fails again, because we can see that things have improved. Men no longer own their wives, and yet they are still considered individuals. Women are also considered individuals now, and can work in high-paying jobs and own property. The social contract, then, may have been patriarchal in the past, but not inherently so. Its inherent logic, it seems, actually led to the defeat of those patriarchal remnants. You'll have to try harder if you want to convince us that it is inherently patriarchal. Let's start again. Why can't Pateman accept that women are individuals now, and this means that our society is patriarchal no more? Because, she says, the individual is a masculine construction. It is built upon the natural attributes of males, while repressing female natural attributes. Therefore, women who enter the liberal game and perceive themselves as individuals are actually going against their nature, and also affirming an order built upon male attributes, a patriarchal order. What is that natural female attribute that is being repressed? It is the power to create life. The power to create life is the power that men don't have, and they had to annex it from the woman if they truly wanted to dominate. The thinkers of the past claim that it is actually the man who is the creative force in the act of conception, and the woman is just an empty vessel that carries his creation. Once they declare themselves the creative power, they could use this power in order to create another realm, in which they could be the sole creators. She writes, "Man's generative power has a dual aspect. The genesis of new physical life belongs in their hands, not in the empty vessel. Masculine procreative power creates new life. Men are the principal agents in generation. Patriarchal argument thus refuses acknowledgement of the capacity and creativity that is unique to women. Men appropriate to themselves women's natural creativity, their capacity physically to give birth, but they also do more than that. Men's generative power extends into another realm. They transmute what they have appropriated into another form of generation, the ability to create new political life, or to give birth to political rights. Men have created the civil sphere, in which they make all the rules. Because of that, these rules are masculine by nature. If women were allowed to participate in the creation of rules, they would create based on their nature, the nature that creates life, and the rules would be different. Obviously, although she doesn't say it, Pateman believes that they would be better. As it is now, however, the civil realm is completely masculine. By then making the private realm part of the civil realm, men have subordinated the female creative power to the male creative power, and created a system that is inherently patriarchal. Hence, it makes no difference that nowadays we have female lawmakers. The entire system is masculine by nature, and by joining this system, they agree to play by masculine rules. So the liberal feminists, who try to achieve equality for women within the liberal system, are engaged in a futile struggle, which can never achieve equality. She writes, "The conclusion is easy to draw that the denial of civil equality to women means that the feminist aspiration must be to win acknowledgement for women as individuals. Such an aspiration can never be fulfilled. The individual is the patriarchal category. The individual is masculine and his sexuality is understood accordingly. If, indeed, sexuality is a term that can be used of a self that is extremely related to the body and sexual property. The patriarchal construction of sexuality, what it means to be a sexual being, is to possess and to have access to sexual property." Evidently, Pateman believes that the desire to possess someone sexually is something that only men have, while women's sexuality is different, and based on their power of procreation. And because the individual is constructed around masculine sexuality, women can never be true to their nature by trying to become free individuals like men. This, then, is why our society is still patriarchal, and inherently so. The only way to fix it, according to Pateman, would be to create a different society, in which men and women are on equal footing. Instead of a society based on liberty, equality, fraternity, let's have a society based on liberty, equality, and the gender-neutral term, say, solidarity. This shall be achieved by giving women the power to participate in creating the rules of the system, and create rules that are based on their creativity, which is different from male creativity. Only then can we have true equality and liberty for all. To which I say, great, let's do that. What are your suggestions? What does your female creativity say about how society should be structured? Whoa there, let's not expect too much. Pateman says that she has no solutions. Her aim is merely to delineate the problem, and leave it for those who come after her to form the solutions. Well, it has been 3.5 decades. Where are these feminist suggestions? I didn't encounter any. And actually, if you think about it, it is impossible that we will ever get them, since female creativity is allegedly repressed by the current system. The entire system, according to Pateman, is built on the repression of this female power, so we can't expect it to be able to express itself. The only way to do it would be to smash the patriarchy, return to the state of nature, and then rebuild society, this time by giving expression to the liberated female creativity. But wait, before we take such a drastic and dangerous measure, how do we know that such a power even exists? How do we know that this isn't just a figment of Pateman's feminist imagination? Well, we will just have to take it on blind faith. In other words, this is nothing but conjecture. This is creationist feminism par excellence. We are supposed to believe that our society is a patriarchy, because in its creation, it supposedly trampled on some speculated female creative power. This is an unfalsifiable claim, which is designed to achieve two goals. First, it casts women in the eternal role of the victim, the damsel in distress, and places men in the eternal role of the oppressor, those who always owe women for what they are collectively doing to them. Second, since women cannot individually save themselves from their damsel state, they must put their faith in the only thing that can save them, creationist feminism, which thus gains more political power. This is not about trying to achieve equality. It's all about power.
But wait, there's more.
Yes, there's another side to this book.
She's also very critical of employment contracts for the same reason. Imagine that there's a 50s dude named Bert Mansley, and every morning he goes to work in the Chrysler dealership from 9 to 5, and every evening he comes home to his catgirl trad wife and he says, "Honey, I made $100 today." Bert is, allegedly, a free man. He sells his labor power, his ability to work, to his employer, unlike a slave who is themselves bought and sold. And again, Bert does it all voluntarily. Pateman says, that's bollocks. You can sell your blood or your hair or anything that can be detached from you, but your labor power can't be detached from you. If you think it can, try sending your labor power to work whilst you stay in bed. The idea that we have pieces of ourselves that can be parceled out and sold, like our time or our skills, is, she says, a fiction. Bert isn't free. In exchange for wages, he does as he's told, like a good little boy. The reason he accepts it is because when he comes home, he at least gets to boss around his wife. And so, she says, modern society is not based on free individuals agreeing, as social contract theorists might have us believe. It is based on the economic exploitation of everyone and the sexual exploitation of women.
This all sounds quite familiar, of course. It has all been covered by Marxists. We are reminded of the similarities between Marxism and creationist leftism. They both believe that society is divided to an oppressor class and an oppressed class. They both think that people who live in the current system only delude themselves that they are free and happy, because the liberal ideology they grew into brainwashed them into believing that they are. And they both think that only a revolution can set people free and bring equality. But there are also some essential differences. For starters, Marxism isn't creationist. It believes in historical progress. For Marxists, the current system isn't based on a one-time twisting of the state of nature into something bad and oppressive, but the result of gradual progress, and is actually better than what was before. It's just that we need one more revolution, another progress, to get to full liberty and equality. Because of that, Marxism does present alternative ideas to what we currently have, and that makes it falsifiable. We can discuss the solutions of Marxism, and criticize them, and some places have even tried them out. This gave it an edge over creationist leftism, but by the 1980s, it was obvious that Marxism had failed, and Pateman is capitalizing on it. She notes that feminism has always been subordinate to Marxism in leftist thought, and wants to reverse this order. What we heard Abigail describe is basically an attempt to explain the exploitation of workers as the outcome of patriarchy. Meaning that if you truly want to achieve a just workplace, the way to go isn't Marxism, but feminism. With hindsight, we can say that the usurpation worked, but not in replacing Marxism with feminism as the main radical leftist ideology. Rather, in replacing Marxism with creationism. Creationist leftism, unlike Marxism, cannot be falsified. Thus, the leftists can keep on holding to it, no matter what, and keep on feeling morally superior. But there are also some maladies that creationism inherited from Marxism, and one of them is the wish to destroy and subjugate the so-called oppressor class while pretending to actually be liberating it, and doing it for equality. Marxism regards the bourgeoisie as the oppressors, and claims that they are actually suffering from their capitalist way of life, and will be made happier in a communist order. The fact that such an order will not give the bourgeoisie an opportunity to actualize the attributes that they are naturally good at, like individualism, entrepreneurship, competitive spirit, etc., does not bother Marxists, because they believe that they are not natural attributes anyway. In Marxist thought, the oppressed class is the one that represents human nature, while the oppressor class represents a twisted corruption of that nature. The same thing goes for creationist leftist thought. Recall what Pateman said about how men created civil society. First, they twisted the natural order of things by claiming that the creative force in the procreation of children is the man. Then, they utilized this creative force to create the civil realm. As mentioned, she doesn't say much about what the alternative should be, but one thing that she does note is that the individual, that masculine invention, will probably not have a place in it. But I thought that the individual is an expression of masculine nature. So if you erase individualism, wouldn't that mean that men would be oppressed? When you think Pateman's logic through, and this is true of every other creationist feminist I read, you realize that they don't really want equality, but female domination. The true replacement that she wants for liberty, equality, fraternity is not liberty, equality, solidarity, but liberty, equality, sorority. One of the signs of it is her dabbling in what creationist feminism is best at, the dehumanization of men. In the latter part of the book, when she tries to convince us that our society is still patriarchal, the examples that she uses demand of her to completely ignore the experience of men, as they report it, and instead tell us that they are actually displaying patriarchal thinking. When discussing the proliferation of prostitution in the capitalist market, she rejects the possibility that it is because men simply have needs, and claims that it is because they were constructed, by the patriarchy, to believe that they are men only if they have sex with women. The exemplary display of masculinity, she writes, is to engage in the sex act. Now, I've been a man my entire adult life, and I am familiar with the many ways in which we men flaunt our masculinity, to others and to ourselves. I am so manly I pay women for sex has never been one of them. But Pateman knows better, because she knows what constructs us. To prove her point, she asks how come statistics show that 15 to 25% of the male clients merely want a hand job, when this is something that they can do for themselves. Clearly, she argues, this shows that men just want to assert their right to sexually use women. The possibility that maybe a woman's touch has other psychological benefits for men is not something she considers, because it doesn't fit her theory. So, you see, PhilosophyTube's reading merely skims the surface of the book, and because it is so superficial, she doesn't tell you about all the creationism, intolerance, and supremacy plaguing its pages. Until, of course, it comes to her.
So, that's Pateman. And now, some questions. Starting with the big one. For the grand prize of £1 million, what is the definition of woman? We're talking here about the female sex and the male sex. So who exactly is in which category? I can help you out here. We can phone a friend. The Oxford English Dictionary defines woman as... Oh, no way am I touching that one, Chief.
Okay, that was pretty funny. Now, get to the point already, because it's about to get funnier.
Pateman has quite a flexible approach. She says we don't need to obsess about chromosomes or genitals or anything like that to draw out the way in which the meaning of men and women has helped structure major social institutions is not to fall back on purely natural categories. That means that whatever physical sex is, whether it's a biological fact or a social construct or something in between, she just wants to talk about how it gets cashed out politically. There are some other clues in Pateman's work that indicate a flexible approach. In modern patriarchy, a variety of means are available through which men can uphold the terms of the sexual contract. What is now labelled sexual harassment helps maintain men's patriarchal right in the public world. So enforcing the sexual contract doesn't always involve actual sex. According to Pateman, it is about controlling us for sex and reproduction, but it operates on a more general level. For example, literally, as I was highlighting this section on page 114, I was sitting alone in St. James's Park in London, and a man came up and sat right next to me.
Alright, we know where this is going. She recounts a story about a dude who was trying to chat her up, thus invading her private space. I'll skip it.
And this flexible general approach has advantages. It means that if somebody can't have children or penetrative sex, like because she's too young or for medical reasons, then according to Pateman, she's still a woman. She still experiences misogyny. She's still assumed to exist for men.
I'm sure you all guessed by now where this is going.
I'm transgender. As we've just seen, everything Pateman says should apply to me as well. I get sexually harassed. I experience misogyny. I'm in the political category of woman. Which makes it all the more weird and heartbreaking that the final chapter contains some pretty explicit transphobia. Pateman says that trans women are just men who are pretending, which is false and also bigoted, and she also seems to be assuming that there are only two sexes and they are definitely biological and unchangeable, which, spoilers if you're watching in 1988, turns out that's not true either, but more to the point, that contradicts what she said before. Having said in chapter 1 that she's only worried about how sex gets cashed out politically, now all of a sudden she seems to be assuming that it is a fact of nature.
Nice try, Abigail. You really don't get it, do you? You are intelligent enough to get it, but because you don't employ critical thinking while reading those leftist texts, it all goes over your head. The rejection of your womanhood is not some mishap on Pateman's part, not some prejudice that she failed to shake, but the logical conclusion of her thesis. There is no flexible approach in Pateman's feminism, nor can there possibly be. To her, the thing that defines a woman is the power to create life. Patriarchy is the thing that is constructed out of the suppression of that power. So to deny that this power is the thing that defines women is to deny the patriarchy, to refute the whole book. You don't possess that power, which means that you are not, nor could you ever be, a woman in her eyes. Your woman identity is one that you constructed, which makes it an expression of individuality, of the masculine creative power. At one point in the video, you say that you bought the new edition of the book, hoping that Pateman might have updated her views, showing that you still don't get it. There is no way that she will change her views on this. There is no middle ground on which the two of you can meet. You have two options. Either reject Pateman's entire thesis, or accept that you are not a woman. Abigail, of course, doesn't want to do either, so she does some deconstruction. One of the principal ideas of deconstruction is that the text is not monolithic and contains many meanings, including meanings that are foreign to the point the author is trying to make and betray their prejudices. However, there is an honest way to deconstruct a text and a dishonest way to do so. If you are honest, you attempt to understand the main argument the author is trying to make, and if there are parts of the text that seem to contradict that argument, you try to explain where they came from, what prejudices might have affected the author. This is what PhilosophyTube is pretending to do here. She claims that Pateman's point is that sex is not determined by biology, so when she is referring to trans women as men, it is simply because she failed to apply her own logic to this particular issue, and remained stuck in the patriarchal logic that she was arguing against.
The reason I bring it up, though, is because Pateman's book is itself a great illustration of the things it is trying to critique. She realized that the state of nature was a political construction. She exposed the hidden rules that enforce subjugation, even as we imagine that society is based on free people agreeing. And she made the same mistakes.
However, this is completely dishonest. It disregards the lion's share of the text and relies on a few fragments here and there, clues, as Abigail calls them, that she actually believes what Abigail would like to believe that she believes. Needless to say, the fragments that Abigail quotes are completely taken out of context, and in context, they mean the opposite of what she says they mean. Unfortunately, this type of dishonest reading is regarded as completely legitimate nowadays, and is one of the things contributing to the rot of academia. It basically allows the reader to pretend that the text says whatever they want it to say. Thus, instead of using text to engage with other worldviews and expand their horizons, these readers just use them for self-affirmation. And that is the sure path to narrow-mindedness. After she says that about the book, Abigail continues.
But there is some great stuff in here that could go on to inspire something more. And that is exactly what happened.
Yeah, the great stuff that she is talking about is exactly the creationist logic that leads Bateman to her anti-trans stance. But PhilosophyTube, because she makes no real effort to understand what is actually being said, ends up promoting an ideology that is unequivocally intolerant of her identity, and wishes to erase her. This myopia characterizes all of Breadtube. PhilosophyTube then goes on to discuss something that Bateman inspired, namely CRT. CRT officially stands for Critical Race Theory, but what it actually stands for is Creationist Race Theory. It basically conjectures that the state of nature was that of harmony until white people came and imposed a structure called whiteness, which subjugated all other races. And so, when she reconnects to the story about Detroit, Abigail discusses it through that lens. Instead of promoting actual solutions for the plight of poor black people, she, and the rest of Breadtube, promote this creationist crap that is specifically designed to increase racial tensions and destroy the possibility of any solution. The reason why she dressed up like the devil's lawyer is she wants to imply that the social contract is a deal with the devil, that, perhaps, our liberal democracy is not a good thing. Creationist thinking is designed to make people feel alienated to the society they are in, to feel miserable, and want to overthrow it. Instead of trying to make them happy, it tries to make them angry and despondent. And for what? A conjecture. Nowadays, pretty much every so-called oppressed minority has a creationist theory attached to it, and activists who promote it. They all contradict each other, and cannot possibly coexist. Currently, they are battling to cancel each other, and emerge as a triumphant creationist leftist theory. And if we, as a society, ever accept the story told by any of these creationist movements, the only possible logical solution to the problems they argue we have, the only way to achieve true equality, would be a revolution in which their logic would be enforced, and anything representing the old logic will be violently erased from existence. Tell me, Abigail, do you really think that if this logic of might makes right takes over, you will be the one left standing? I promise you this. I am a Jew, you are LGBT. If this creationist monstrosity ever takes over, one of us would be the first to be sent to the camps, and the other one would be the second. You, of all people, have an interest to defend liberal democracy against these anti-liberal ideas. What the hell are you doing? How is PhilosophyTube so blind to how foolishly she is acting? Why is she so incapable of self-criticism? Well, she does try to criticize herself. Here is what it looks like.
It is also possible to overcome epistemological blocks. It's not like one division where everybody's walking around hypnotized. For example, we could apply it to this video. When I was done writing it, I went back and I looked at the script and I realized that I explained Pateman and then Mills. Partly because it's chronological, but partly because, as a white woman, it's easier for me to start with something that I kind of get and then build out. But that's not true of everybody. That's not a neutral way of presenting things. That's my whiteness affecting how I gather and interpret knowledge. And the fact that I can become aware of that suggests that maybe these blocks can be worked on.
This is just sad and pathetic. The reason why she doesn't do self-criticism, it appears, is that she's been convinced that self-criticism means criticizing the structures that allegedly control our mind. Hence, after she's done propagating an ideology that wants to erase her trans identity, now she's promoting an ideology that wants to subjugate her white identity. It's disheartening to see such a smart and talented person using her skills towards self-destruction.
As your lawyer, I can only tell you what the books say. Which strategy to pursue will be up to you.
No, Tricksy Mephistopheles. What you are doing is engaging in the spreading of a cancerous ideology. You are shilling for an anti-liberal, hateful, totalitarian way of thinking, using your skills to present it as standing for freedom and equality, and hiding the fact that it stands for the opposite. I don't know how aware you are of it. In any case, you are not innocent. It seems that Breadtube is now on the decline, and will go the way that the SJWs went, the way that all internet phenomena go. The pendulum might swing to the right again, and will necessitate the formation of a new online leftist movement. This time around, let's have this movement be based on the values of democracy, freedom of thought and expression, equality before the law, the right of individuals to pursue happiness, pluralism, skepticism, critical thinking, adherence to rational thinking and truth, celebration of human life and its preciousness, solidarity with our fellow humans, no matter their identity, fighting against concrete injustices, defending our free society against anyone who tries to impose their vision on us, such as Nazis, communists, Islamists, and leftist creationists, and supporting people in the fight for their rights in oppressive societies, all over the globe. You know, all the things that the left should stand for, and that today's so-called left is against. When that day comes, I will be there. Until then, beware my bite.